It was the first time all 8 of them were smiling at once. A real, genuine 8-part harmony of pure, unadulterated joy. We were sitting on a blanket in the middle of our living room floor, 6 months after their chaotic and terrifying birth. The sunlight streamed through the window, catching the dust motes dancing in the air, and for the first time since they were born, the world felt quiet, perfect. I was making a silly face, a ridiculous combination of puffed-out cheeks and crossed eyes, and it happened. 8 tiny, gummy smiles bloomed across their faces, a field of flowers turning toward the sun. My heart didn't just swell, it detonated. A laugh, so full of relief and love it was almost a sob, escaped my lips. This single, perfect moment was worth every second of the pain, the fear, the struggle. It was the payoff. It was everything. "James," I whispered, my voice thick with tears of joy. "Look, you have to see this." He was standing in the doorway, where he had been for the past 10 minutes, watching us with his usual, unreadable expression. I turned to him, my face beaming, wanting, needing to share this sliver of heaven with him. But he wasn't looking at the girls. He was looking at me. And as my eyes met his, he did the one thing that could shatter the perfection of that moment. He looked away. He turned his head, his gaze shifting to the blank wall beside him, his jaw tight with something that looked like boredom or perhaps disgust. He didn't say a word. He just erased the moment. He made our joy, my joy, invisible. In that instant, the sunlight felt cold, the laughter died in my throat, and the 8 perfect smiles of my daughters became a testament to a love that I was experiencing completely, utterly alone. NIF, your heart just broke into a million pieces. Please, take a second to like this video and subscribe. You need to see how a woman, whose joy was rendered invisible, learns to build a life so bright it can't be ignored. N.N. James was a curator, not of art, but of life, his own. He was an architect, renowned for his minimalist, cold, and breathtakingly beautiful designs. His entire existence was an exercise in aesthetic control. Our home, one of his own creations, was a masterpiece of glass, concrete, and empty space. There was no clutter, no mess, no unnecessary sentiment. Every object was chosen for its form and function. I, too, had been chosen. I was a classical musician, a cellist. He said he fell in love with the elegant melancholy of my music. In truth, he fell in love with the idea of me. I was the perfect, beautiful object to place in his perfect, beautiful life. I was his human cello, an instrument that produced a sound he found pleasing, but whose inner workings he had no interest in understanding. And I mistook his aesthetic appreciation for love. I saw his control over our environment as a sign of his brilliant, ordered mind. He designed my life as meticulously as he designed his buildings. He chose our friends, other artists and intellectuals who fit his aesthetic, our vacation spots, always places of architectural significance, and even the correct emotional responses to art and music. Joy was acceptable if it was a quiet, contemplative appreciation of a perfectly executed piece of music. Sadness was permissible if it was a poetic response to a tragic opera. But messy, chaotic human emotions were clutter. They were to be avoided, hidden, and controlled. And our marriage was a performance piece, staged in a museum of our own making. I played my part, producing the beautiful, melancholic music he desired, both on my cello and in my life. I suppressed my own louder, more vibrant personality, sanding down my edges to fit into the clean lines of his world. I convinced myself that this quiet, ordered existence was a more elevated form of happiness. But in the silent, empty spaces of our perfect home, a deep loneliness took root. I was an object, admired but never truly seen, appreciated but never truly known. When I told him I was pregnant, his reaction was not joy, but a quiet, controlled panic. A baby was the ultimate clutter. It was messy, loud, and unpredictable. It was a chaotic, human element that threatened the sterile perfection of the world he had so carefully constructed. But he was also a man who understood form. A family was a form, a structure, so he adapted. He would design the perfect family just as he had designed everything else. He approached my pregnancy as a design problem, researching the most aesthetically pleasing cribs, the most minimalist strollers, the most intelligent developmental toys. He was not preparing to be a father. He was curating a new installation in his museum. And NTHE news that we were having octuplets was not just a complication. It was a violation of every principle he lived by. 8 babies. It was a symphony of chaos, a cacophony that would shatter the quiet, minimalist peace of his world. I remember the look on his face at the ultrasound. It wasn't fear or shock. It was a deep, aesthetic offense. It was as if someone had proposed building a garish, sprawling amusement park in the middle of one of his serene landscapes. The doctor, a warm, bustling woman, was ecstatic. A miracle, she had declared. James had flinched as if the word itself was in poor taste. Then came the second blow. They were all girls. For James, this was another aesthetic failure. He had a specific vision for a son, a quiet, serious boy he could teach to appreciate form and line. 8 daughters suggested a world of pink, of frills, of loud, emotional chaos. Everything he despised. He never said it out loud, of course. Overt disappointment was a messy emotion. Instead, he retreated into a cold, architectural silence. He began to design the nursery. It was a masterpiece of minimalist design, all white and gray, with 8 identical, starkly modern cribs lined up with geometric precision. It looked less like a room for babies and more like a high-concept art installation about mass production. It was his attempt to contain the chaos, to impose his will on the biological reality he could not escape. NMY pregnancy was a lonely, isolating experience. He treated my changing body with a quiet disdain, as if it were a beautiful sculpture that was being slowly vandalized. He never touched my belly. He never spoke to the children within me. He was waiting for the messy, biological process to be over so he could begin the real work of curating them into acceptable forms. The birth itself was a blur of medical efficiency. He was present, but not there. He stood in the corner of the delivery room, a silent observer, his face a mask of detached analysis. He was watching a construction, not a birth. When our 8 daughters were born, healthy and screaming, he did not rush to my side. He did not cry. He simply nodded, a curt, dismissive gesture, as if a contractor had just informed him that a difficult phase of a project was complete. He had his 8 objects. Now the messy work of refining them could begin, and NTHE first few months were a blur of noise, exhaustion, and an overwhelming, all-consuming love that I had never known was possible. Our silent minimalist museum was transformed into a chaotic, beautiful nursery. It was filled with the sounds of crying, cooing, and my own exhausted, happy humming. It was filled with the clutter of diapers, bottles, and baby blankets. It was, for the first time, a home. And I had never been happier. The loneliness that had haunted me for years was gone, replaced by the constant, demanding, and deeply fulfilling presence of my 8 daughters. James, however, treated our home as if it were a territory under enemy occupation. He would retreat to his study for hours, emerging only when necessary, his face a mask of pained tolerance. The noise, the mess, the sheer, overwhelming humanity of it all was an assault on his senses. He never held the babies. He never changed a diaper. He referred to them not by their names, but as the infants, as if they were a collective, abstract problem. He was not a father. He was a landlord whose tenants were violating the terms of their lease, and I tried to share my joy with him. I would point out the tiny, funny things they did, the way Grace would sneeze with her whole body, the way Faith would grasp my finger with surprising strength. I would try to pull him into my world, this beautiful, chaotic world of new motherhood. He would respond with a tight, polite smile and a non-committal nod before retreating back to the silence of his study. My joy, the most profound and powerful emotion I had ever experienced, was invisible to him. It was a language he refused to understand. Then came that day on the living room floor, the day of the 8 smiles. It was a perfect, crystalline moment of pure happiness. It was a miracle. And when I turned to share it with him, he looked away. He didn't just ignore the moment, he actively rejected it. He saw my joy, my messy, tear-streaked, overwhelming joy, and he turned away in disgust. It was a deliberate act of erasure. He was telling me, without a single word, that my happiness was a form of clutter. It was an unsightly, emotional mess that had no place in his perfectly curated world. The silence that followed his turning away was the loudest sound I had ever heard. It was the sound of my heart breaking. It was the sound of a door slamming shut, not on a room, but on my soul. I looked at my 8 smiling daughters, and I knew, with a certainty that was as cold and hard as the concrete walls of our home, that I was a single mother in a house for 2. NNTHE moment he looked away became the cornerstone of my new life. It was the fixed point from which I would build my escape. The love I had for him, already faded, crumbled to dust. In its place, a quiet, cold resolve began to form. I could not live like this. I could not raise my daughters in a museum where their joy was considered an offense. I could not let them grow up believing that their father's love was conditional upon their ability to be quiet, orderly, and emotionally sterile. I had to build a new world for them, a world full of color, chaos, and unconditional love. And I began to plan my escape with the same meticulous precision he used to design his buildings. I was not a woman of finance or law. My strengths were in music, in emotion, in the very things he despised. I had to find a way to use my strengths to build a new foundation for our lives. My first step was to reconnect with my own clutter. I started calling my old friends, the loud, laughing women he had slowly edited out of my life. I called my family, whose messy, loving homes he had always disdained. I began to rebuild the support structure he had systematically dismantled. NMY's second step was to find a voice. For years, my cello had been a tool to produce the elegant melancholy he desired. I started playing again, but this time for myself. I played angry, chaotic pieces. I played soaring, joyful concertos. I played the messy, complicated music of my own soul. And as I played, an idea began to form. I was a musician without an audience, a mother of 8 daughters in a world that often silences women's voices. What if I could create a space for those voices? And I started a blog. I called it The Octave, a play on my 8 girls and my musical background. I started writing. I didn't write about my husband or my heartbreak. I wrote about the beautiful, chaotic, and often invisible moments of motherhood. I wrote about the symphony of 8 babies crying at once. I wrote about the profound, earth-shattering joy of 8 simultaneous smiles. I wrote with a raw, unfiltered honesty. I wrote about the mess, the noise, the clutter, and the overwhelming love. I poured all the joy he had rejected into my words, my music, my newfound voice. NNTO, my astonishment, people started to listen. The blog, at first, had only a handful of readers, my friends, my family. But then something happened. One of my posts, a piece I wrote titled On a Day of 8 Smiles, went viral. It was shared by one mother, then another, then thousands. My story, my invisible joy, resonated with women everywhere who had ever felt unseen, unheard, or unappreciated. The comments section became a chorus of shared experiences. I know that feeling. My husband is the same. Thank you for putting it into words. I had tapped into a universal truth, the silent heartbreak of having your happiness ignored, and the octave became a phenomenon. I started a podcast, interweaving my writing with my cello music. I created a space where the messy, chaotic, beautiful truth of motherhood was celebrated. I was contacted by a book publisher. They wanted me to write a memoir. The advance they offered was staggering. It was more than just money. It was a key. It was the foundation for the new life I was planning to build. And James, of course, was oblivious. He didn't read my blog. He didn't listen to my podcast. My burgeoning career was happening in a world he didn't inhabit, a world of messy, emotional women he found distasteful. He noticed I was happier, more confident, but he attributed it to me finally adjusting to my role. He was so secure in his own curated world that he couldn't see the revolution that was happening right under his roof. He still saw me as a beautiful, silent object. He had no idea the object had found its voice and was about to bring the whole museum crashing down. NTHE Day, the first check from my publisher arrived. I knew it was time. I hired a lawyer, a woman who specialized in helping women leave emotionally abusive and controlling relationships. I showed her the blog, the podcast, the community I had built. I showed her my bank account. "He doesn't know about any of this?" she asked, her eyes wide with a mixture of shock and admiration. "He has no idea," I replied. "His world is very small." She smiled, a fierce, brilliant smile. "Good," she said, "then he'll never see us coming." NTHE Day I left was a quiet one. I waited until he was at a week-long architectural conference in Japan. I had movers come, not to pack up a whole house, but to take the things that mattered: the 8 cribs, the mountains of baby clothes, my cello, and the colorful, chaotic artwork my daughters were now old enough to create. I left behind the minimalist furniture, the stark white walls, the empty spaces. I left his museum exactly as he had designed it, only now it was truly empty. I bought a house in a vibrant, family-friendly neighborhood, the kind of place he would have detested. It had a big, messy yard, brightly colored walls, and enough room for my 9-person symphony to make as much noise as we wanted. I left the divorce papers on the cold, concrete counter of his kitchen, right where he would see them when he got home. Attached to the papers was a copy of my book contract and a printout of my new bank account balance. NHI's reaction was not rage. It was a profound, shattering confusion. I received a single, bewildered text message from him. "I don't understand." It read, "I gave you a perfect life." It was the saddest, most pathetic thing I had ever read. He truly did not understand. He could not comprehend that a life without joy, without connection, without the freedom to be messy and human, was not a perfect life. It was a prison. NTHE divorce was swift. He was so stunned, so completely blindsided by my independence and financial solvency that he had no ground to stand on. He was left alone in his silent, perfect, empty museum, a curator with nothing left to curate. His life, which had once seemed so grand and important, was now revealed for what it was: a small, lonely, and colorless existence. And years passed. My daughters grew up in a house filled with music, laughter, and color. They grew into 8 unique, brilliant, and emotionally intelligent young women. They were loud, they were messy, and they were joyful. They knew their happiness was not something to be hidden, but something to be celebrated. My book became a bestseller. The Active grew into a multimedia platform, a community that supported and empowered millions of women. I had taken my invisible joy and used it to build an empire of empathy. I found love again, with a man who was the opposite of James in every way. He was a warm, kind pediatrician who laughed loudly, loved the chaos of our home, and thought the sound of my 8 daughters talking at once was the most beautiful music in the world. He didn't just see my joy, he celebrated it, amplified it, and added his own to the mix. One afternoon, I was sitting in our messy, sun-drenched living room, watching my 8 daughters, now teenagers, attempt to bake a cake together. There was flour on every surface, laughter echoing through the house, and a feeling of pure, unadulterated happiness that was so thick you could taste it. My new husband came and sat beside me, slipping his arm around me. "Look at that beautiful mess," he said, his voice full of love. I thought back to that other day, on another living room floor. The day a man had looked away from my joy. He had tried to make it invisible, to erase it. But he had failed. Joy, I had learned, is not a fragile thing. It is a force of nature. You can ignore it, you can reject it, but you cannot destroy it. It will find a way to grow, to bloom, to build a new world from the ashes of the old one. He had looked away, but I had learned to look at my own life, at my own daughters, and see the brilliant, beautiful, and undeniable truth of my own happiness. And it was the most perfect view in the world.